In today's conversation, I speak to Woosh Raza about the uncomfortable conversation that needs to be had by UK employers around the Black Lives Matter movement and the tragic events of George Floyd et al. We discuss whether diversity is really a philosophy and ponder why HR should have the uncomfortable conversation now. I ask Woosh whether the Black Lives Matter movement really affects UK employers. And if it does, what can employers do to acknowledge what's happened and to function in this environment? This is a fascinating conversation on how HR can lead their organisation during these difficult times. Listen up to the rest of the conversation. Before we begin our conversation, here is a quick shout out to the pathologically curious. Check out the Maverick Paradox magazine. It's a digital magazine written by Mavericks for business owners and professionals. You can find the magazine at themaverickparadox.com. The magazine's aim is to provoke maverick leadership everywhere. Welcome to the Maverick Paradox podcast, where we explore what it is to be a maverick and discover effective modes of leadership. I am Judith Germain, and my mission is to propel the maverick mindset into a world where character and integrity will ultimately have a higher premium than personality and bureaucracy. So thank you for joining me on this journey. If you would like to continue with me, then please subscribe to my podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or one of the other popular podcast platforms. And today our guest is Woosh Raza. Hi Woosh.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm very well. How are you, Judith?
I'm good today and very excited about our conversation. But before we begin, tell us who you are and what your work experiences have been in terms of HR.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Judith. Delighted to be having some time to chat with you. Always a pleasure. So my name is Woosh Raza. I am currently the head of HR and learning and organizational development for a brilliant charity called Phoenix Futures. So we are an addictions charity. We specialize in providing support to those who have suffered an addiction, so that alcohol, substance abuse. So we work across various different settings in the UK. We're a national organisation. We also work in Scotland, working in prisons, working in hospitals, working in the community, working in our residential services, rehab. Really, the whole purpose of Phoenix is that removing that stigma around addictions and recovery and supporting people with their recovery. Where I've worked, and I have the privilege of leading the HR, L&D and OD teams. It's a nice organisation, great team. Prior to that, so in the last kind of 10 years, as my career has expanded, I've really worked in healthcare, I've worked in social care, I've worked in housing. So third sector, charity, public and private, but across the piece, really a focus on healthcare and health and social care. So yeah, that's a little bit about my career history. Worked for the NHS, worked for private organisations, mental health organisations. So yeah, a real mix of different roles, really.
Wow.
Yeah.
You're very experienced then, because you've been everywhere.
I have. I've been there, done that, got the t-shirt, as they say.
That's brilliant. So you're a great guest to have on anyway, but in particular, because I know that you have a sort of a role with the CIPD around diversity and inclusion. Is that right?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm very passionate about diversity and inclusion. I know you know this. We've got together. We've worked on projects, that have been close to my heart, and you've been part of some of the events I've ran in recent months. Diversity and inclusion is an area I have led successfully on D&I strategies for organisations. I also work very, as you say, closely with the CIPD. I'm actually one of the co-chairs of the CIPD Central London Committee. So who we are, the CIPD has local committees. Depending on your area, I kind of have the privilege of leading the branch for Central London, alongside my co-chair Charlotte, who's amazing, and we provide kind of engagement opportunities, events, networking for CIPD members that live or work in or around Central London. And as part of my role in there, I'm actually the lead for D&I within our committee. I'm also on the D&I network network steering group for the CIPD. So that brings a collection of senior D&I professionals together to discuss, debate, challenge when it comes to D&I. I also work with the Princess Trust on especially business in the community as a job coach. I work with a voluntary, so Stonewall, as part of their BAME, people of color, LGBT kind of network and cohort. So yeah, do a lot of kind of really focused work around D&I. I'm really passionate about it for a number of reasons.
Wow, thank you. That is a lot of depth of experience there. So before we really get into it, can you explain what diversity and inclusion means?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, what a question. How I see it is, and these are buzzwords, right? So we hear this, don't we, in the day-to-day in HR, and I like to think that we have all, hopefully, somewhat to a degree, kind of taken some of the time, specifically in recent weeks, to ask ourselves that question. So for me, when I now look back and I think, okay, what's diversity? The first thing I think about is between equality, diversity, and inclusion is I think equality is having a seat at the table. I think diversity is being able to have a voice, so being able to speak at that table, and inclusion or belonging is having that voice or that opinion or that employee voice heard. I think those would be the great way of me saying, how would I look at those two things, three things as separate entities? Equality is getting people, diverse group of people around the table, so having access to that. Diversity, being able to raise your thoughts and views, and inclusion and belonging, actually having those views and ideas and experiences being acknowledged and being heard. That's how I've always seen ED&I. I also think, if I was thinking very theoretically and academically, I think diversity is actually a philosophy. It's an ideology. It's not necessarily. I think when we think about diversity now, we think black or gay or lesbian or disabled. Diversity is a way of thinking. I think diversity is actually knowing that there are different perspectives to how you see life. And if you can acknowledge that, I think you're diverse in your thinking by default. If you know that there are other ways of looking at issues and things, and there are different opinions that hold just as much validity as yours, I think that is diversity.
Yeah, I really think that's a really good point, because diversity has already shown in whatever study you want to look at, just how profitable and how good it is for a business if you have a diversity in thought. And you can only have diversity in thought if you have diverse people, i.e. disparate people from all walks of life.
Yeah.
Working together, and then you come up with solutions that you've not considered.
Absolutely. And you're absolutely right. There is a business, the commercial drivers in why you would encourage diversity of thought, as you say, specifically around, product development, around engaging with your customer base, who I'm assuming for many people will be diverse people accessing services or treatment or products. So it makes good business sense. I think the argument is really clear for why diversity should play a prominent role in business strategy. What I don't think we see enough of is how you encourage that to happen through behavior and through culture. And that, I think, is where we really could, as HR and D&D professionals, really need to step back now and look at, okay, what does that mean for my organization? Okay. And what does that mean for my own behaviors? Because there's some element of self-reflection I think people need to do in that, but also around the behaviors and the values of those that work around you.
I really like what you're saying. I'm just sort of thinking this podcast would be like, yeah, I agree. The thing, which will be really boring, but I do agree. What made me think about it though was that I think part of the issue, especially in the UK, is that it's seen as if it's an add-on. So like I'm thinking that when I design a leadership course or whatever type of leadership is, you bake in all sorts of things, including culture, whether that's the workplace culture or the culture of individuals. But you don't say, and now this is the bit of the course we did the culture bit. Do you know what I mean? You don't it's not a bolt on. And I think what I've seen is that if you train or encourage or set objectives around these baked in concepts, then they're more accepted because you can see the difference. But when you say, here's your set of objectives and here's your cultural set of objectives, or it's like, oh, this bit isn't needed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Uh, The fact that you call it an add-on is exactly what I think a lot of people do see it as, that this
Mm,
issue. Um, and that's why I've mentioned that business strategy, because
yeah,
it should be part of the business strategy, not an additional fluffy nice to have. I think we have this problem that we see D&I as that nice, fluffy,
yeah,
warm feeling, fuzzy stuff, and that could not be further from the truth. And the fact of the matter is, if you whatever your driver for increasing diversity or for building inclusion practices into your organization really should be systemically entrenched in your business strategy. And I keep saying this, but what I mean by that is, right, okay, if you've got an objective to to create 90% of your, so I'm just using an example here, but if you had 90% of our services are to be delivered digitally within the next 3 years, great. But how can you link that particular technology focus to support with that engagement piece? So you could say something around, actually, we know that might be an issue for those in our workforce that potentially don't engage with tech. So that's where your Gen Z or your generational aspects could then vary. And that in itself is diversity in its thinking, to say, right, can we get a steering group then set up to for those that engage well with technology, but those that struggle, so that we can really tailor our learning and development initiatives to ensure that the entire workforce comes with us in achieving that. That's one example of how you've created a link between what you're trying to do as a business and the people that you need to get you to that place. And if any of your objectives involve people, then I tell you for a fact your objectives will involve diversity or diverse thinking, because people are
yeah.
diverse. And I think that's where we do, like you say, that's a great example. You say that add-on piece. It shouldn't be an add-on. It should absolutely be part of the core um, objective when you set out to achieve, that behavioral change, or when you set out to achieve that cultural change.
Yeah, I agree. But I think what's interesting is that, watching the discussions on places like LinkedIn and Facebook and such,
Yeah.
what I see business owners, business leaders talking about Black Lives Matter, what can they do for people that run an organisation, and I see diversity and inclusion managers and directors like yourself talking about it. But what I don't see much of is the HR function itself talking about it.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, very good point.
Which surprises me as an ex HR, thinking this is the time to talk about that in the whole kind of diversity equality piece.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I I surprises me as a current HR professional as well, seeing that, in the sense of, you're right, is this is my okay. So in the way of how I would kind of frame the HR's role in this really important discussion, in this really important piece of work that we all need to get behind, I think the first step, and this is something that I'm really passionately advocating for the events that I'm planning for the CIPD, is how much do we in the HR profession community, how much do we take the time to educate ourselves on the issues that we're then expected to support the organization with? And sometimes I do take issue with, it's D&I, it's a HR issue. It's D&I, it should be an organizational issue, and it should affect every single individual working within your organization. There is something around groupthink in that, I think. We know we have a traditional, a stereotypical role of HR professionals, and I think what would be helpful to enable the shift in thinking is to engage with more people from different points of view in the HR community, if that makes sense. So, I think you may not necessarily, you might look around your HR team and you might not have the most diverse HR team. And I think what we need to get away from is the uncomfortable conversation that when someone points out a statistic around, your team demographic, it's not to take offense at that, it's to recognize it, to say, okay, we're not going to sack people and just bring in loads of different people. That's not what we're trying to do. No one's job's at risk because we realize we don't have diverse people in the team. But you can access diverse opportunities through other mechanisms. So engage in a CIPD event, or discuss it with a consultant that you may have on LinkedIn, a D&I professional, or get yourself along to some webinars webinars around this issue where you can hear from different people. What I say to the HR community is find someone who would have a different point of view to you and have a conversation with them. And however uncomfortable that conversation may be, you will walk away with a more diverse perspective on that particular issue. And that is one thing that we can all do very, very easily, because remember, we have LinkedIn now, which gives us an entire platform to engage with professionals. And I'm sure we have, lots of people that we can see through that platform. Technology has enabled us to mean that webinars are more readily accessible. How many webinars have we seen since COVID? I mean, it's pretty much, especially in HR, like we love a good webinar, don't we? So, I think there's, like get yourself booked onto one of them. Most of them are free, I'm seeing. So there's loads of ways to diversify your thought processes. But it does start by recognizing where you stand in the issue, but where your team and the HR team also stand. I've had conversations with my lot, and I'm lucky because I have a really diverse team. But even with that diversity, Judith, I'm not going to lie, it was a really uncomfortable conversation.
They are uncomfortable, aren't they? They are very uncomfortable conversations.
Absolutely. I had a member of my team who was just so candid about her experiences as a Black woman, and how that impacted her two young children, and specifically in light of what's happening with George Floyd and the reverberations into the Black community, in terms of what that has meant. And she shared that candidly. And I think there were people from in my team that necessarily had never heard those direct experiences come from someone who has been impacted directly as a result of years of prejudice and years of oppression in their society. And I swear to God, that was the turning point in the conversation, with so many people saying that made the issue close to home for me, if that makes sense. Because until now, I thought of racism as an issue that I wasn't part of me, because I don't engage with racist people. I don't have racist people in my friendship group. But until you hear the experiences come from those individuals, how and educate yourself, go on Google, read up on these issues, then you're never really going to take that step forward to what we call it, not just not being racist. It's not good enough just saying I'm not racist. We now have to actively move our position to be that of anti-racist. And in order to do that, you need to understand what that experience feels like in order to be able to challenge it when you see it happen.
Yeah, I think that is so powerful, because I was having a conversation with some friends yesterday, funny enough, and I was saying that as a Black woman, in the UK, there are so many instances of even 2020 that you don't talk about them because you've managed to grade them, so it's not no one's hit you over the head, so it isn't that bad. So you may talk about something that you consider mild, which absolutely horrifies your friends, because and it makes you go, oh yeah, that weren't really good, actually, that was worse than because you've just put them in order, and you think, I'll tell you this because this is probably the least offensive thing,
that I can think,
and then you see their reactions and you're like, oh, and then it makes you reassess that and go, but I've kind of got used to it over the last X.
Well, you desensitize from it because that's how we functioned, and that's how we deal with it.
So you want
to
get on at work, and I think in some respects HR has that problem of not having someone to talk, because who do you go to when you need an issue? You go to HR, but what happens if you are HR?
Well, absolutely, exactly, it's very true. You've got to remember, it's so good that you mentioned that, and I'm so glad I can share something that I've reflected on. I was having this chat with a really close friend of mine who's a HR professional last week, and the history of HR, right? We're problem solvers, right? That's what we are. So where the whole background to our profession and why our profession has even been created, in the roots of our profession has been rooted around problem solvers for the organization, supporting complex issues, having somewhere to take those problems, designing and support. So we get this thing where we don't know something. We don't actually say we don't know it because it kind of, we feel that we have to know it because the business is coming to us for that type of support. And in that ethos, we've created potentially we've restricted the transparency in how we're having those conversations, because we wouldn't want to say we don't know the answers in HR, because then that will set a credibility issue and the business won't trust us that we can handle their issues. Well, there's still somewhere you can take that as a HR professional, in terms of a network, in terms of WhatsApp groups that I think are on the rise. People sharing best practice, sharing documents, sharing their ways of how they've tackled problems. We need to do. I've seen a shift to that, but I think we need to do that so much more, because we have such a diversity of experiences that we could all use to help each other. And I think we have to come out of that mindset in HR that we are the problem solvers and we need to know everything, because we don't know. No one knows everything about the current situation that we're in. No one, no one.
I'm not sure it's entirely a case of needing to know everything, but I think part of it is I will, as in HR professional, I will fight to the death for that employee or for that manager. And if I make a noise about me, I am not here for this really essential fight. Do you see what I mean? And I say fight, I can't solve the problem for everybody else if I'm not here to solve it. So I will go to the networks, like you said, and talk to my friends, but I want to be here for that person that's suffering, whether that's the manager, employee, or the organisation. But because you go into the profession because you want to make change. So you step out of that for yourself to affect other people. I guess I can see that as a mindset for HR, and a lot of issues for HR. Actually, a question I've got for you, because I've just been, watching the conversations, probably like you have. People say that some people are saying that the Black Lives Matter movement isn't really a thing for the UK. So how does that affect the UK employer now? Because obviously at the moment, a lot of people aren't physically in the workplace, but they are in front of a computer, a lot of people. So they're probably not able to access a support network or things like that. So what do you think an employer needs to do to acknowledge what's happened and to function within this framework?
Yeah, good question. There's a few layers to that, so let me try and take that one step at a time. I think from an acknowledgement perspective, and if we're looking at employers, I think one thing is to acknowledge it. That would be acknowledge it. And I've had a lot of interesting conversations with other organizations this last few weeks on this issue, where and through networking with HR professionals, where there seems to be a hesitation in order to get a communication out because they don't want to get it wrong. But my question to those organizations is, how can you get it wrong when you're basically saying we may not have all the answers, we don't necessarily have all the solutions, but we stand behind the Black community in solidarity in response to what's happening in the last few weeks? Even if you got that I think it's a starting point from which to have a conversation. And I have noticed a very standard organizational practice of the corporate element of how does this message need to be positioned and all of that aspects around it. I think what people are crying out for right now, and I myself stand in this category, is authentic communications, not a black square because it's Blackout Tuesday, or because you can put the hashtag Black Lives Matter on it, but you haven't done anything necessarily to confirm your organization's position on the issue. So it's okay to say we haven't necessarily thought about this as an organization, because by saying that you're being authentic to say we now make a commitment to educate ourselves. Even that is great. I think there's something around the authenticity of the messages coming out, and the fact that prompt messages should be coming out. It's not something you should be sitting on. The momentum is now, the time is now. You need to stand up and be counted as an organization on which side of this line you fall on. And I think that will go a long way to supporting people of color, more specifically the Black community right now, working for your organizations, that there's visibility on this issue. I think in the sense of, you're right, yes, we are working in lockdown, we are working in an isolated environment, and I know many, many, many of my Black co-workers and Black friends who are feeling not only emotionally impacted because, there's the community sense of being in an organization has been reduced by the fact that we're working in our houses. And I think one thing that, I shared a video with you, I can't remember, of the Guardian editor, and she was brilliant, where she was like, I've not done my usual article this week because I've not been okay. And I think it's allowing your Black co-workers and your Black employees to know it's okay to not be okay right now, and to check in on their well-being, check in on your Black co-workers and your Black friends to find out if they're okay. Some of these are small acts of kindness, and taking times to educate yourself and to really understand what the issues are, speak volumes for where we need to get to. So I think those, for me, some tangible takeaways. You are right in the sense that this issue has been politicized, hasn't it? So lots of people I spoke to have said, oh, it's an America issue, it's not a UK issue. Absolutely not. There are examples of discrimination, albeit maybe less severe, but people have lost their lives in this country as a result of the color of their skin. Let's not say that doesn't happen here, because it does. The Race Relations Act, the legislative changes around this, there's always been legislation around, discrimination. Doesn't necessarily mean that discrimination doesn't happen. So I think don't contextualize the issue as one that only affects the USA. It affects this country just as much. And I think those measures in terms of visibility, communication, well-being, and general solidarity are what I would say would be key enablers right now for the Black community.
Yeah, I think they're really, really good points. And what struck me there was that there seems to be a view that you need to make an external PR statement for your customers.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, a good point.
To continue buying from you.
Good point.
But the internal communications, because there's a lot of silent voices, and not all those silent voices are Black voices. There are plenty of white people or Chinese people or people, let's face it, just people who are upset and concerned about what's happened. And when the organisation says nothing, it's speaking to everybody, not just, so you can't be an organisation that says, well, we don't actually have many people of colour, so it doesn't really matter so much. Everybody's watching now, and it's like you said, that Guardian piece, and that lady was unable to work. I've spoken to a lot of my friends, because, as you know, I'm no longer in that kind of corporate field now, who said that last week they could not work because they spent most of the week crying.
I'm not surprised.
And some people are like, I don't understand why you're crying, because it's in America, it doesn't affect you. And I think it's the memories, it's all the little things that's happened, and some of the big things that's happened over the years they've been existing. And it's just brought it all up.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. And this is why I said the issues we know these aren't new. I think there has been a oppression which people have had to endure their entire lives, not just working lives, and their family members and the family members before them. So for those individuals, like you say, it brings up so much more than the issue at hand right now. It speaks to the very heart of the prejudices that they've probably been experiencing in some shape, way, or form for their natural lives. And I think that is an acknowledgement, like you say. I think it's really important. It's really interesting you touch on that corporate comms versus internal comms, because I do think there's the two are so important, and your messages around to your workforce is so important, to just say, look, even if you don't have an ED&I steering group or whatnot, or you have had the sophistication that sophisticated kind of networks and systems right now, but actually just recognize that and just say, as a result, we're taking an action to do X or Y or Z. Even that is something.
Yeah, because I think people look and say, when COVID-19 happened and we said that we would stop having people coming to work, they were complex conversations that had to take place, complex things that needed to be considered. But it all happened really quickly. Within about 3 days, most companies had their corporate message sorted, even if it meant that people spent hours and nights working on it. But it happened fairly quickly, and it's been a week
absolutely.
now.
I know, absolutely. Over a week, actually. So, yeah.
So I think that's quite... The other thing I'm thinking about is that a lot of people have said to me that they feel really guilty now, and they don't know, they don't know what to do with their guilt. So they're not, so they want to have conversations but don't. They feel bad about themselves and they want to do something. So my concern, I suppose, from the HR perspective is that there are people in organisations who feel traumatised with Black Lives Matter, but then you've also got people who feel guilty and traumatised because they feel that they are complicit in this. So here's a multi-layered question. How do we help those that feel guilty and bad, which may lead to defensiveness or real sorrow, and how do we kind of unite both parties? Because what I see is like some of these individuals that feel bad are seeking the people of colour to provide advice and support, but the people of colour are like, I'm too tired, I cannot tell you anymore. So there's this kind of like, do you know what I mean? It's kind of like, as a HR professional, both sides need to be dealt with.
I think I've certainly seen an outpouring of people, having those eureka moments around, I have been privileged, and great, because we've turned a corner, I think, in those people and their way of thinking. So that's really positive. It's not to discredit anyone. I think for me, it gets to a personal place because of my identity, and people have to remember that is we're talking about it in a corporate environment, but it's effectively talking about individuals and who they are. So it's hard to have those conversations. So that's what we say is in those uncomfortable spaces that you grow. So if you are, I'll frame my response in that in for two audiences. If you are feeling that sense of guilt, or specifically, I know white people and white privilege we talk about is people recognizing that, and that's, I think, for people to even have that self-reflection, great. But at the same time, having to put your story out there and your history out there, and to give people and trying to educate people, as you say, it is exhausting for many people, for many people in the Black community right now anyway, with what's going on. And I had a great it was a really great kind of piece that I read recently around don't use your Black friends as Google.
And I saw that as well, actually.
That really spoke to me, because I was like, oh my God, we have this instinctive, and it comes from a good place.
Yes,
because you want to learn and educate, and great on you for actually, like I say, for getting to that point where you want to work on yourself. Brilliant. But I think that speaks volumes in the sense that one line is don't use your Black friends as Google, because at the moment it's exhausting. People, like you say, people can't work right now, they can't focus right now, they're upset, they're angry, they're heartbroken, to then have to sit down and go, this is the history of my people or the history of my community is it's too much, for people to want to do. And I think Google and resources out there and webinars, and I keep banging on about these webinars, but there is lots of really good resources, information, educational material, books, podcasts, videos, films, Netflix documentaries, so many ways to engage right now and to educate yourself, to spread the the love, I guess, of everyone taking a role in educating themselves. It's only going to work that way. It really only is. So that would be my advice to people feeling that guilt. And it is an uncomfortable, anguishing experience to think that you've privileged from a society in a way that you now realize others haven't been able to access. And that, I have that same um, guilt, I think, being a man, because women in the world of work, still, look at maternity leave and biased decisions around, assumptions made about women. Equal pay, which, again, this year has been another blow to that with the removal of creating mandatory reporting, which I think is bizarre. But there's I think there's all I can resonate with that sense of guilt as a man. It's that same, because we all have a responsibility to understand and to acknowledge that and dismantle it. The way we do that is through education. The way we do that is through having uncomfortable conversations. The way we do that is looking at different people's perspectives and points of view. So I would say, utilize your online resources. We live in an age now where technology is giving us access to lots of information that we could use. Buy a book on Kindle or Amazon, around race relations. There's loads of great resources. I'm happy to share some of my personal reading lists to people listening, as a means of getting the conversation started. There's some great documentaries on Netflix if you're one of those, I need to be moved. I need to, have different ways of, different media. There's lots of different things out there that people could access.
Thank you for that. And I was just sort of thinking that it's a time to listen, isn't it? And I think there's a big difference from somebody genuinely saying, I didn't see this, explain it to me, and somebody who says the same thing and then defends everything.
It
wasn't my ancestors that did that.
Yeah.
When I'm in the company, I treat you fairly. It's that, because that's what makes it exhausting, I think, in terms of the other person carrying the emotional load.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's the manner in which it's what you're seeking, how you're seeking to engage. If you're not opening yourself up to being, to recognizing how your role affects the world, that's I think the difference between saying I'm not racist and then actively being anti-racist. And there's, we all have a role to play in that, every single person. And I think that's, like you say, the difference between wanting to genuinely educate yourself and recognize this, and to engage to defend, are two very different things. And that is absolutely, as you say, exhausting to have to do. And I think it is, you can only get there through having that deep self-reflection about, how have I enabled it in some shape, way or form, and what could I do differently to what I'm not doing at the moment. It's those types of mindsets that encourage the most growth when it comes to these really sensitive issues.
Thank you for that. I was just thinking, HR is primed for this, isn't it? Because as HR professionals, our job is the uncomfortable conversations, isn't it? We tell people they're going to be made redundant. People get sacked. We tell them that, we've delivered bad news I worked in an organisation once where, one of our employees had been shot. Obviously, they were, so you deliver things, or you go to a funeral of an employee, and uncomfortable conversations is our job. Yeah. And we train managers on how to do it. How many times have you delivered or been asked to deliver a training course that includes how to have difficult conversations?
Yeah,
it's like we do that all the time. So
all the time.
This isn't a subject that I think HR professionals can walk away from, because I think it reverberates quite deeply through the employee psyche.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think more specifically, I think learning and development professionals have had exposure on the sense of, like you say, challenging, courageous conversations, difficult conversations, however you want to frame it. But I think there's a difference between, if I'm being really honest, there's a difference between being commissioned to provide that support to the organization, in which case what we would potentially would be doing is then engaging with consultants perhaps to come in and design that session for us. So the difference I find from my own personal experience of HR is I might not necessarily put myself through that course, even though I've arranged it, if that makes sense. And that's I think if others can speak to that experience, or who can potentially listen to this going, yeah, that's, so I haven't actually been on my own difficult conversations training within my organization, even though I may have designed it with the consultant or supported the trainers, then get onto that conversation, then get onto that training. Because sometimes, like, this is what I think with subject matter experts, with SMEs, we either engage those subject matter experts, so externally, to come in and do that training, or if we designed that training, we're probably an L&D professional, not a HR professional. But if you're a generalist and you've gone through that kind of designing piece, then engage in that particular course. And then role model it as well, because I think training is one element of it, but the courage to be able to stand up and to challenge anti-racism within your organization, it takes a different mindset. And I was reflecting on this, and I think this is something I think you would wholeheartedly agree with. It takes a Maverick approach. For me, that was one thing I was reflecting on, to say, I have been complicit in witnessing racially motivated decisions around hiring, around how we treated employee relations cases, grievances that were raised from people, in my earlier career. And I knew what was going on, and I didn't say anything. And I will be forever, that will haunt me, because I think the more you educate yourself, the more you realize what it is that how much of your platform and your privilege can give you an opportunity to address that. So for me, the difference was, okay, well, how do I, as a HR professional, have that conversation with my senior leadership team, or whoever, your head of department, whoever needs to have that conversation, and do it in a way that doesn't make me feel fearful for my own employment. So I do think that comes into it.
Yeah, it does.
And I feel that I've probably been so lucky. I live in an amazing, me and my partner are financially really stable. And I'll tell you why I'm saying all this, because it means something to where I come from in this, is that I know, and I'm at that point in my career where I'm like, if I got sacked for saying the right thing, I've seen enough discrimination, either through my own lived experience of racism, homophobia, in the world of work and outside of work, to know that those values and my values are way more important to me than if I lose my job, then it was clearly never an organization that valued me. And I could take that hit for a couple of months. So, but I think some of those factors come into play when HR professionals are complicit, because remember, we're exposed to those really sensitive conversations, because we're the people that ask for CVs, right? So when someone hires, we know firsthand how they're shortlisted. And if we can see that they've been biased, to put it lightly, or racist, to put it strongly, around how they've invited people in for interview, then why? My ask of HR professionals is, it does take courage, but we have to speak up and be advocates of the change that we're asking our organizations to move with us on. It's not going to work if we don't play a role in dismantling that behavior, that racism, that prejudice that's entrenched within the organizations that we work in.
Yeah, I think that leadership requires a lot of courage, and I think for a number of years HR's had quite a bad rap, haven't they? I mean, every HR professional's heard the human remains joke.
Yes.
And then COVID-19's happened, and furloughs happened, and all of a sudden, payroll professionals are the heroes when we get paid. And then the amazing what HR's done about, dealing with all the complexity of COVID-19 and furloughing people and making sure that it's the right time to deal with this, because people are really getting that HR can be strategic, needs to be on the board, needs to have a voice, because, almost out of nowhere, they've risen, as a profession, to say, this is why you need us, because we can deal with these big emergency stuff. in very
Absolutely.
short notice.
Yeah, and mobilize quickly and reframe our offer, learning and development, going online with training, discipline, managing employee relations through
Yep,
remote support, managing, providing, diagnostic support, and absolutely.
it's been amazing.
Well, we have, we
Yeah.
should really celebrate that, and I do think HR heroes is the right way phrase, because we've all been, massive superstars right now through this. I think the history of our profession again comes into sharp focus here, because you've got to remember, for years we've been trying to get that seat at that top table, to say we're strategic, we can add value here, we're not just a transactional admin department that does contracts and letters. We can do a lot more. We can champion people a lot more. And now we've got our foot on the table. All right. So lots of organizations will have a HR director, will have a chief people officer, chief HR officer, whatever you want to call it. Lots of lovely strategic roles that are emerging as a result of the years of perseverance of us saying, we can provide us support, we matter. And I think that also plays into the fear sometimes of challenging the organization. Do you see what I mean?
Because in case it gets taken away, you mean?
Absolutely. We've been given this opportunity. We've been given this privilege of having a seat around the table. Now, if we start speaking out and saying, actually, we have senior leaders in organizations that are racist, or we've been entrenched in a way of working in a very privileged way, we're fearful that everything we've done to get us to have that seat at the table will be revoked. And that is something we have to actively seek to address now with our organizations, because I genuinely believe that our role, just as much as I think we call it trusted advisor. I know the behavior map that the CIPD have produced kind of give us really clear behavioral frameworks on how to position ourselves within organizations. So I think the word trusted advisor has been one that resonates with me, but also that critical friend and the courage to challenge. These are the behaviors that we need to be demonstrating more in those organizations at the highest level to dismantle racism. You can't do that if you're not going to speak out. And sometimes I do think that fear of having our position within the organization as HR revoked is what stops us from speaking out. And I don't have the answers here, Judith. I'm just making observations. I wish I did, because I'd be really keen to say, well, absolutely. My book is out next week. No, I'm joking. But I think that's the position, the kind of the juxtaposition that we find ourselves in. And I think, how do we proceed in that environment?
Yeah, and it's also because I wouldn't want the listeners to be confused, because I assume you're similar to me in saying we're not saying that there's systemic racism in every organisation, because that's not what we're saying.
Yeah.
What we're saying is there are individuals who are hurt from what they've seen and they've gone through lived in experiences, and equally there are others who feel either defensive, or disbelieving or guilty. But as HR professionals, you have all those different behavioural sets and feelings that needs to be addressed. It's not, you can't paper it over. And I think maybe the problem is that people think if you say something, you're saying everyone's racist or the company's racist, and that will cost money in court, which is not the case. It's just, it's a bit like, an analogy might be like COVID-19 happens and we don't talk about it. We just send people home, but we never say anything about it. And we'll say, we might see you at some point or we might not, but that's it. I'm not making light of it, but it's a similar thing, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Like, we would never imagine sending people home and not talk about whether we expect them to come back or whatever.
Absolutely. What a great way of illustrating what the point, Judith. That's really resonated with me, what you've just said, honestly, and I'm sure it has for others who just listened in on that. I honestly think that you would absolutely. You wish that was significant, global
It's a bit like saying there's people dying around the world through this pandemic, but we're not going to talk about it because it's not a work incident. It's an outside work incident. So we'll pretend it didn't happen.
Yeah,
because people would go crazy. They were saying, "What you're saying? People are dying everywhere."
What's our position on it? Absolutely, and it's the same for this issue. You know, I do think I do want to say though on the point you said around racism. Right? Yes, I agree with you. Not everyone. We're not saying everyone's racist. I am saying there's racial discriminatory practices, which you don't have to. It's about educating. It's about raising an awareness. So I think once you have an awareness of certain issues, you get to see that. And I've seen that from my own lived experience. The other point is being silent is actually being complicit in something. And you may have the most tolerant, inclusive, brilliant organization. And I really hope that many of you out there can say some of those words against the organizations that you work in. But if you're not going to put yourself out there and put yourself in a position to talk about that, regardless of whether you have great practices or you may have a systemic issue, or you've just never talked about it, but you don't think there's a problem, whatever you fall on that gradient, you have to say something, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying is that's what we need to do, is that visibility on this issue. And I think what people are really, it's resonating is the fact, if you're the more authentic, and I mentioned this earlier on, the authenticity in that messaging is going to be how you bring your organization along with you and how you bring your senior leadership along with you. We haven't really touched on senior leaderships, but they play a crucial role in this, and openly encouraging an atmosphere where people feel that they can bring their whole selves to work. And I think that's something in the D&I space that we've all been saying, championing, whichever angle you look at it: disability, mental health, women, LGBTQ, BAME, people of color. Every part of those spheres is championing that people should be able to bring their whole selves to work and be authentic in the workplace. Well, how can you achieve that if you're not talking about it?
And there will be organisations out there that have little or none issues, because I think sometimes where people think that an acknowledgement or something means that there's a problem, and it's not, it's not seen that way. When Apple decided to black out their music for that Tuesday, it made a statement, and I'm assuming, but I don't know, but I'm assuming that the employees within that organisation felt something because that took place.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think sometimes people, because if you think about HR as a function, there's always a concern about if you say something, then that gives cause to litigation. And that's not what, and that's not a fear to have if you're if you're honestly just saying, look, this is the situation, and that's
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, there is legal ramifications, and I think the two shouldn't be mixed in my view, in a sense of from a HR perspective, is that like I mentioned earlier, the Race Relations Act was here from 1976, and that's before my lifetime. Like these legislations have been in place for years. The 2010 Equality Act has kind of strengthened that, and if you have those issues, like you say, if race-related claims, discrimination claims, well, you're always going to have a protocol whereby you deal with that. And actually, I would assume that many organizations have a clear framework. This is about enabling a cultural change. And I think the two, yes, I agree with you. I think if you're, I can hear people saying, oh, if we talk about it, it's going to invite loads of claims, or people are going to say we're racist, and da, da, da. I'd encourage you to explore what it is that you're trying to achieve, because if you've got positive intent behind your communications, then really you should trust that your workforce it will come along with you on that journey and support you with that journey. If you're already thinking that, I honestly do think that you if you think there's a real risk in that, I would say that probably says a lot about where your culture is.
Yeah, you have a problem already.
Absolutely.
Right. So my conversation, my point there wasn't really to, it wasn't really to say if you've got a problem, don't attach it. It's more of a case of saying, don't feel that by saying something you will cause a problem.
Yeah.
Because for the vast majority of employers, this is not a case of saying, oh no, we've got systemic racism. It's an opportunity to say, as employees, you may be feeling something from what you've seen on television. So as an organisation, we've set up some sort of forum, or we've done, a call-ins, or your manager will check up on you. That's the angle that I'm coming from. I think we can do something as opposed to,
it's action orientated, isn't it? And it's about taking a stand and inviting people to discuss that with you. And the thing is, in organizations, and I don't necessarily think this is a race issue, I think this is a how we structure the world of work issue, is when we try and speak to our employees, we try everything in our power to think about every response that may come back from the organization, and then safeguard our response to it so that we're seen as the strong, sensible employer that has thought everything through. You can't have thought everything through with this issue. There's just no one in the world right now who can say, as an organization, we have all the answers. And it's about that vulnerability of organizations saying, we know we need to do more. Because I think every organization that I would say really strongly, there can't be one organization out there that says we're doing everything we possibly can to tackle this issue. Just like I just don't think the same for COVID. There's ways we're managing the crisis because it's a crisis, but we don't necessarily have all of the answers. And I think the issue that we've done in terms of building organizational culture, specifically within the UK, is when we talk to our employees, we kind of don't necessarily want to get all that feedback come through. We want it to be like, we've already thought about it and here's all the answers. But in this situation, I think that goes against you, because you really want to hear from your employees, about what their experiences have been, how they can support the organizations. If you get this right, you can actually come out of this with ambassadors for your organization in various different teams and across your organization that will feel listened to, will feel heard, and will feel galvanized to take positive actions on your behalf, thereby strengthening your employer brand on this. So, there are ways that you can really get that engagement from your organizations up. But in order to get that engagement, I think there's some level of vulnerability that organizations need to kind of be okay with and be comfortable with. And that goes against the grain of everything I think that organizations do, in the sense of, we have to have all the answers, we have to be seen to be leaders, we have to know everything, we have to reassure our employees that they're in safe hands, and I think that's some of the conversations that need to happen, I think, to make that change.
So what we're really saying then, I suppose, is that we need courageous leadership that recognizes the feelings of its employees and the obviously the managers within it, that gives a chance for people to speak out and say what they feel, and probably recognizing that some of the things aren't work related.
Absolutely. And I think the conversations that we've seen are that we're like, oh, how does this play a role in the corporate world, this issue? Well, how we're saying we've shifted in so many, before COVID and before George Floyd, before 2020, we had already seen a systemic shift in the way that we were managing our employees, because we know that technology has enabled work-life balance. I think there's no such thing as work-life balance. How do you make the dots? How do you divide the lines between work and life right now, especially because you're in your home, you're working, you're working and you're living in the same space. So before all of this, home working, flexible working, agile working differently, all of that was part of the thing that we were seeing anyway. That was a cultural shift in the way that HR culture was changing in certain organizations, specifically in tech. And that enabled a conversation around bring your authentic self to work. Bring your your whole self to work. That's what we call it. Your whole identity. Then we have this underlying aspect of citizenship and communities in the world of work. So we know we're moving away from a migration away from top-down leadership, hierarchical structures, to more of a sense of communities, collaborative working, connecting between us and making the organizations that we work for a success. All of that takes an acceptance and an understanding of the individual, and I mean the whole individual, right? And diversity of thought, diversity of things, diversity of diversity in general. So how can we say how can we say this is not a work issue? Because this issue speaks to the very heart of who individuals who work for us are experiencing, and having to deal with. And I think that the corporate organizations play an increasing role in establishing citizenship within your organizations and establishing those communities. You can't have a community if you don't know who's in your community and what they stand for and what's important to them. And all of this speaks true to the issues on racial prejudice, on racism, around all of the things that we're seeing.
Fantastic, thanks for that. That's a really good place to stop, I think.
It's been a great chat as always.
Great. Would you come back again, Woosh?
Oh my God, I would. Yeah, no, absolutely. You of course, I'd be more than happy to come back to a future podcast.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you once again for tuning into the Maverick Paradox podcast. I hope you have enjoyed listening to my conversation with Woosh as much as I enjoyed having it. If you are pathologically curious and would love to find out more about the Maverick Paradox, then please subscribe to this podcast on one of the popular podcast platforms. Alternatively, you could explore our resources on Mavericks at maverickparadox.com or read the Maverick Paradox magazine. We publish frequently each week. If you subscribe, you will get our monthly newsletter. And let's not forget my book, The Maverick Paradox, The Secret Power Behind Successful Leaders. For those that love a good discussion, you could apply to join our exclusive Facebook group. And finally, if you would like to work with us or just interested in finding out more about the Maverick at work, check out our website maverickparadox.co.uk.